Before we get into this list, these are 10 specific, relatively specific eras that I just love to learn about. Love to pick up a book on, love to listen to a podcast about, love to watch a video of YouTube on, so on and so forth. They're not like specifically like historical, like historian acknowledged, like, oh, this is the Gilded Age, or this is the Renaissance, or this is that. There's probably only one that's like a major like historian acknowledged term, if I'm making sense. It's the first one I'm going to mention, so we'll get to it rather quickly. But basically what this historical time period list is just stuff I cannot soak in enough information about. And the stuff I care about far exceeds just the 10 I'm going to list here, but these are my 10 absolute favorite time periods to just dive into and soak up as much information as I can. So let's get to it. My top 10 favorite historical time periods. My number 10 is the Neolithic or Agricultural Revolution. Now, this early history stuff is a little bit hard to determine exactly when. I've heard a lot of different theories on when the Neolithic Revolution truly began. The most common consensus is 10,000 BC, roughly, give or take. But this Neolithic Revolution took place from 10,000 to 2000 BC. A lot of people may be asking, if you are watching this video, what the heck is the Neolithic Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution? 10,000 BC was right around the time that the Ice Age was coming to an end, and the Earth was a lot different. A lot of these big ice glaciers were melting away, and we're getting a lot of land. Like, land is out there and available, and Greenland, hospitable land. All right. The end of the Ice Age meant the death of a lot of sources of food for hunter-gatherers, right? The woolly mammoth died out around this time, and many other creatures that these various roaming tribes, hunter-gatherers, would go out and hunt and use for food. So the fact that land became a little bit more hospitable, right? Getting Greenland, there's a lot more fresh water. Something clicked. Something in the head of these early Homo sapiens clicked that, hey, why don't we just settle and stop being nomadic, right? Stop traveling around, and let's just pick a spot and start growing our own food. And obviously, it didn't just magically all happen in 10,000 BC. This was a process that had been churning for quite some time. But the Neolithic Revolution is basically the beginning of settlements, right? These cities and villages and towns and whatnot that we all just take for granted today. The very basic concepts of what we have today started in the Neolithic Revolution. All right, the idea of growing your own food, all right, to provide for it, provide for a group of people, was the start of civilization. The animal husbandry, I believe, is one of the terms, but domesticating animals for usage, pigs, cows, sheep, goats, all sorts of things, for wool, for food, and for milk. This all happened during the Neolithic Revolution. And again, a lot of the stuff that we take for granted today started back then. And obviously with settlements came written history, came social hierarchy, basically what you could provide. If you had certain, farmers were in very high regard, and there was, you start to get a lot of leaders that are in charge and coming up with things. But a lot of the early settlements, and it's kind of tragic too. I hate that the Middle East is as much of a mess as it is, but a lot of the early settlements started in the Middle East. The Mesopotamians, Sumerians, so much more. There's ancient Egypt, there's ancient China, and there's a lot of different places all over the globe. But the Middle East is really the cradle of civilization, early civilization. Really admirable stuff. Lot of information just uncovered, and there's still a lot yet to be found. So Neolithic Revolution comes in at number 10. Number 9. I've always been fascinated with Japanese culture, but especially interested in this this rapid, seemingly random change that that Japan went through in the late 1800s, 1868 to be specific, the Meiji Restoration. Around 1850, Commodore Perry, Matthew Perry, I believe it is, to be specific, from the United States, went over to Japan with a bunch of warships and forced Japan to sign a treaty of trade. There was resources and whatnot. This was kind of an age of exploration. Japan had been a shut-in country for over 200 years. They were very specific. They didn't want any outside influence, outside intervention, in whatnot. But this is kind of the way the world was going. And this outsider in Commodore Perry of the United States coming in and establishing a forced and very one-sided trade deal opened up the doors, opened up the ports to a lot of other countries to do this. And Japan realized that it was very much not prepared to handle the outside world, or the West, as they often get called, because a lot of people had influence over this. China had been picked apart, and the Opium Wars and whatnot. But all of a sudden, Japan went from this country of samurais and not like a city state. It was never wasn't like a unified thing, but there's like different regions, different territories. The show Shogun kind of shows kind of like what it was like. But all of a sudden, 1868 happens, and the Meiji Restoration happens, and all of a sudden Japan industrializes and becomes this global powerhouse. And okay, this is what the West is doing. We need to get on that level. And all of a sudden they're going after China for territory, going after Korea, trying to get land and resources on the Korean Peninsula. They go after Russia, which was a big deal at the time because Russia's always been a military powerhouse, and they went in the early 1900s and battled with Russia, I believe over Manchuria, if I'm not mistaken. But they went head to head with Russia, who was a powerhouse, and this is before our number 7. But early 1900s, this was a big deal for Japan to just kind of kick the door down and be like, hey, we're on the world stage. And I'm always curious too, just how aggressive they got. All right, between 1868 and then the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of 1945, just how much they changed. They went from this place that just had nothing to do with the world really at the time. All these European conflicts and Asian conflicts, you never heard anything about Japan for hundreds of years. And then all of a sudden they're just there, and one of the biggest powers in the world. Meiji Restoration, unifying the country, and just making it a world powerhouse. It's really cool stuff. So that's my number 9. Number 8, I learned was blown away by the concept of this. I think in the 5th grade, I want to say, my teacher, Mr. Carlo, had or in some encyclopedias, and I remember reading up world wars. I'm like, this is insane. This is wild. The world at war. As a kid growing up and just trying to learn history, you're just mind boggled by the idea of the world at war. So you want to learn about it. Was the world really at war with each other? Was it just this every country in the world is kind of fighting for their own interests and whatnot? And obviously you come around to it, and you really learn about it. But what was the point of some of these things, the major players involved and whatnot. And the time between World War I and World War II is just it's there's a lot that comes with it, because the World War I was the war to end all wars. And in fact, a lot of the failures at the very end of it, or a lot of the things that occurred during it, led to the Second World War. All right, Germany taking a lot of flack for and damages, financial costs from the end of the First World War. They took a lot of it on the chin, and that ended up giving rise to Hitler to kind of come in and be a nationalist, right? Italy was kind of left out of the loop a little bit, and when it came to a lot of the agreements, there was some. It may sound wild at this time, but racial discrimination against Italians that led to Benito Mussolini coming into power. Japan, if I'm not mistaken, was a part of the Entente. They were not one of the major players, but they were on the side of Britain, Russia, and France in World War I, and they were slighted and whatnot, and that led to them eventually turning into joining the Axis powers, or forming the Axis powers for World War II. After World War I, the League of Nations was an idea that U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, had in mind to keep people, to keep the world in check, and the United States never entered it. Forget the exact reasons why, but a lot of people didn't want to approve of it, and them not being there left a lot of. It was bad. Let's just say it was not a great move for them. And obviously the League of Nations, I think, inspired the United Nations down the road. But a lot of things that were not addressed during, or, well, I guess in some cases before, during, and after World War I, led to World War II. And I'm very, very grateful that, I hate war, first and foremost. I hate the idea of sending people to war. I respect the bloodshed in war. I respect the courage it takes to do it is unimaginable. I don't think I could ever. But I feel like World War II was this war. This was the war to hopefully end all major wars. So we've never really quite seen a conflict like this since. And I hate that the sensationalist term, every time things get a little testy, World War III is coming, so-and-so is going to start World War III. I hate that it turns into that. I really, truly do. I really hope that we don't go back to that. The thought of it is absolutely terrifying, especially in this day and age with the advancement of technology. But 1914 to 45, World War I to World War II is an absolute interest of mine. The alliance, the Entente, and how it started. The alliance system was just insane. But yeah, that is my number 8. Number 7. I guess it kind of bleeds into it because this is an important part of World War I that eventually set the stage for World War II, was the Russian Revolution. All right, 1917, Russia's going through some issues. There had been some revolutions within, but World War I really unified the Russian people. But before long, the casualties suffered. There was starvation. People were just suffering, and Russia had no choice but to pull out of the Great War. And in comes in Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks and so many different factions trying to gain control, and eventually Russia just collapses. And it's incredibly scary thing, because Russia's a big time player, at least 1800s, and even probably before that, to be perfectly honest with you. And for it to collapse from, in a sense, extremists, but this is the people that took it over, this socialist idea. This was very extreme at the time, and I do think it's still extreme to this day. But the whole idea of this, just Russia's gone, USSR, and bringing about this radical change to a massive country that has been a major player for years. is wild. And basically, from the Russian Revolution all the way to the collapse of the Soviet Union is fascinating. I mean, I guess I can basically put the Cold War here, but Russia's attempt at communism, I guess technically communism, socialism, it's similar but not quite the same thing. It's head to head, like this battle with the United States where they weren't really at war, but they were in an ideological conflict, and they were trying to one up each other with capitalism versus communism, and it's an insane story. It's a really great story, sad, tragic, but Russia's or the Soviet Union's effort to popularize communism, to spread communism, is intriguing. Even if I don't agree with the philosophy, and this is something that, like, when it comes to history stuff too, like, I hate Nazis, but I will read a book about Nazis because I want to know the history of it. And people are like, "Ew, why would you do that?" I'm a history buff, and I want to just know these things. All right, I can hate something, hate an ideology, and still want to read about it and understand, because it's history. I don't shudder away from history. I don't. No matter how gross it gets, and bad it gets, I don't shy away from it. But yeah, the Russian Revolution and the collapse of the Soviet Union, 1917 to 1991, very, very interesting time period in that country's history. So that is my number 7. Number 6, people don't realize that Germany has really only been a country, even in just world history completely. Germany was not a country really until 1871. There was Germanic tribes, and in fact, a lot of these Germanic tribes were a reason for the downfall of Rome, invading Rome. A lot of spread out places that had a German culture, but there was never a unified Germany. And I always wondered why that came out of, what that was about. I remember in school, and I remember also a lot of history stuff, there was always this country called Prussia. And obviously it sounds like Russia, so I'm like, is there a connection? No, not really. Maybe there is a deeper one that I'm just not aware of, but I'm like, Prussia, like, where did Prussia go? Is Prussia still a thing? But Prussia was one of 2 major German powers, them and Austria, basically. And under Wilhelm I and Otto von Bismarck, Prussia went on a spree to unify Germany. A very interesting spree at that. So first they battled Austria to basically, hey, we're the face of Germany, essentially. And it was a lot more complex than that. But, defeating Austria was a big deal back then, and for Prussia. And then they started to unify slowly but surely. But this drew Germany into a war with France and Napoleon III. It was very skillfully played because they wanted to push Napoleon III's buttons and get him to invade, attack, or declare war on the German people so that the German people would unite under the Prussia banner and go fend off this French Empire. Napoleon III, as great of a leader as he was not his uncle. The original Napoleon Bonaparte. He was certainly not him. And it started this very quick conflict, and France got exposed. It was so disorganized. Prussia had these incredible weapons called needle guns that gave them an advantage, even though they were outnumbered manpower-wise. Firepower, they had the advantage, and they destroyed France within, I believe, a year. But this whole unification process has really started in August of 1866, and it completed in May of 71. And basically, Germany was united and presented on the world stage as a massive power. And obviously they'd be causing trouble in several years, with World War I and whatnot, and even a little bit beyond that. But this is the birth of Germany, uniting the German peoples under one banner. And a lot of this started happening around then, too. A lot of countries really coming together. We talked about Japan and the Meiji Restoration. in the late 1800s. And this was something that, while they were known as Japan, they had the different places, shoguns, and I believe it daimos. I believe it, that the unification of Germany actually contributed to the unification of Italy, because France pulled their troops out of Italy. France always had a hand in Italy, owning various territories and whatnot as part of their empires. And to fight off this ever-growing threat of Prussia, France pulled out of Italy. And Italy ends up unifying at the end of it. It's like an added bonus. So this like nationalistic pride, this nationalism rush got Germany and Italy united basically because of the Franco-Prussian War. So pretty interesting stuff, but it simply put, it set up Germany on the world stage. So that is my number 6. Number 5. This is my first of 3 ones that have to do with America. Again, I'm kind of glad I didn't just do all of USA history, because that's what I'm mostly obsessed with. I'm glad I picked a specific time period so I can talk about other stuff. But we're going to go the 1860 presidential election, U.S. presidential election, to the end of Reconstruction. The 1860 presidential election was Abraham Lincoln, getting voted into office, getting elected the first Republican president, and it leading to the cessation of the South. Slowly but surely, states were seceding from the Union, and Abraham Lincoln had this. I'm preaching to people who've probably heard this story millions of times, but Abraham Lincoln had one of the most difficult presidential crises of all time to come into. Right, you're coming in, and the Union is dissolving. Right, these states are seceding, forming the Confederation of the Confederates, whatnot, splitting off from the Union. And Abraham Lincoln is tasked with having to do this. And now there were a lot of rough tactics. He did there was a draft, there was a military draft and whatnot, but he did what he had to do to unite the country. And there's a lot of great people in this time period. Ulysses S. Grant, who I cannot wait to talk about for our U.S. President's list on the 4th of July. William Tecumseh Sherman, and so many other important figures in U.S. from this time period, great generals and great leaders. Lincoln's cabinet was top notch, at the time, and how they fought to protect and preserve the Union. Most importantly, to free the slaves. And now this was not a decision. Lincoln didn't really want the spread of slavery. The North really didn't want the spread of slavery anymore, and it eventually became the freeing of slaves, the ending of slavery through constitutional amendments. But I think the most tragic thing about this all is that we never got to see Lincoln as a peacetime president. He was there for the Civil War, had to lead the nation through the Civil War, and a lot of very tough decisions, sleepless nights, were endured to try and bring the United States of America back as united. But we never got to see Lincoln and his plan for Reconstruction and bringing the South back in wisely. It was fumbled. Andrew Johnson takes place after the assassination of Lincoln, and just terrible. One of the worst U.S. presidents, in my opinion, with a lot of the leniency that he gave and whatnot. The show Manhunt, I know it's a show and dramatization of the death of Lincoln and the transfer of power from Lincoln to Andrew Johnson and Reconstruction. But it really shows, and the actor who played Andrew Johnson did a really good job presenting him. But just how bad the Johnson selection was as vice president. I understand Lincoln's reasoning for it. He had I can't remember his name. He had a vice president in his first term, and then the second term he wanted a Southerner to help unify help the Confederates kind of help unify the country again. But yeah, going all the way to the end of Reconstruction, the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, and how he basically, and it's just rumored, but he was elected president in a rumored backdoor promise that he would end Reconstruction and pull Union troops out of the South. Interesting, amazing stuff. And like as important and great as the freeing of slaves was and necessary as it was, this is something that U.S. Grant later realized, is that the amendment, all of a sudden the South's population shot up. Their population numbers officially shot up. And now they had more representation in the U.S. government. And a lot of, there was basically a Southern dominance of U.S. politics, more representatives in the various branches of government based on population. And a lot of bad Southern people, former Confederate idealists, had power now in the United States, and basically Reconstruction went nowhere. But there's a lot of teeter-tottering. There's a lot of good and bad in it. Ulysses S. Grant chasing out the KKK, the original incarnation of the KKK, basically wiping them out and suppressing them for a long time. There's a lot of good and bad that comes from this time period. It's a very, very complicated time period. It really, truly is. And it's a shame that it just ended abruptly in 1877 with Rutherford B. Hayes. And just, yeah, if you guys let me be president, no more Union troops in the South, and you guys can kind of just have at it. And it was a big letdown. It was a sad ending to a promising plan. And again, if Lincoln had a plan laid out, how much better it could have been. That's my number 5. Number 4 is the British Empire. All right, I've heard the quote many different ways, but the sun never sets on the British Empire is one of them. Is a variation of it, but that is it. I mean, the British Empire is impressive. All right, dating back roughly from 1583, their first attempts at colonizing North America, to 1997, and even still today, they technically have like colonies, but 1997 was like the last bit of it, and I completely forgot that for many years that Great Britain held Hong Kong until 1997. I still it was a memory I forgot about, and then I remembered they did like some kind of Beanie Baby celebration for it, and there were all sorts of celebrations of the transfer of Hong Kong from England to China, which is wild. But the British were everywhere. They had, I could be here forever. I could list the top 10 British colonies if I really truly wanted to. But they had everywhere. They had, the 13 colonies in the United States. They had Canada. They had East India Company, which basically made them a major player in India, New Zealand, Australia, various parts of Africa. If I'm not mistaken, I believe they had, let's just say they had many places of Africa. There was a lot. There's a lot that the British had their hands on. And it's crazy that this relatively small island nation dominated the seas, Earth being 75% water. Britain was king because they had such a powerful navy. Dominated the world. All right, they were pulling in resources from everywhere, and after World War II, it really started to kind of crumble and collapse. More turn of the 20th century was a big downfall for them, but after World War II, they had basically been taking a backseat to the United States as like the major world power, or a major world power. And the rise and fall is just fascinating to read, and just how they had their hand in just everything. Number 3 is the American Revolution. All right, the American Revolution, this pushback against the British, right? My number 2 time period-wise actually occurs before the American Revolution, but this gutsy decision by American colonists to push back against the British and some of the abuses that they had, making them suffer for bad British spending and uh, in poor economic decisions and whatnot, making the American colonies suffer when they were such a big producer for Britain. All right. The American Revolution is great. It is really the beginning of the Age of Revolution. A lot of places took inspiration from the American Revolution. I know South America drew influence from the American Revolution and pushed back against a lot of European colonizers. All right. Places in the Caribbean, Haiti, pushed back against the French, which was outstanding several years later. But the American Revolution is one of the most inspiring revolutions of all time. It brought about a new form of government. Really, we're going to push back against monarchies and try this experiment, the American experiment. And people adopted democracy and all sorts of things. Really, seemingly at the time, people power. But I have the timeline here that I really enjoy from 1775 to 1825, which was the end of James Monroe's presidency and the era of good feelings. James Monroe was the last founding father president, played a pretty big part. I think he was just an 18-year-old when he was a part of the American Revolution. He got shot at the Battle of Trenton and whatnot, but he was a major player in it. One of my favorite presidents, to be perfectly honest with you. But just the push, right? You got the American Revolution, then you got the trial and error of finding out how we're going to govern this country. The weak Articles of Confederation, this Continental Congress that really is not doing things right. And then the decision to have a president and the U.S. Constitution, Bill of Rights, and all these decisions that came and birthed really our country and the good and bad that we experience today. A lot of the ideals and whatnot. It started, really with the American Revolution and goes to this, our government today. Even though it's constantly evolved, this is where it all begins. But after the era of good feelings, the United States really honing in on themselves, figuring themselves out. There's Manifest Destiny and everything that leads to the Civil War. But you get the War of 1812 in there, and then this just growing of America, Louisiana Purchase, which is a massive deal. Just a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff in between that time period, and that's why it's my number 3. Number 2, as I said, it was a predecessor to this one, is the European colonization of America. And while it was not great for the many different tribes of Native Americans, it was not great at all. The idea that so many different places had their hand in trying to colonize America, Spain, Britain, the Dutch, France, even Russia, although it was a West Coast kind of thing, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's really the major players. But so many people had a hand in it, and they all coexisted for a while too, which is really wild. All right, we're just gonna send this ship full of people. You're declaring it for this country, and kind of whatever happens. Now, while France was more so, the Louisiana Purchase was like the Ohio Territory, a lot of what would be considered like the Midwest, kind of, sorta. All the way down to Louisiana, they kind of had that. England took over from the Dutch. They just invaded New Amsterdam, and the Dutch surrendered without a fight, and then we're basically out of North America, and then England began its dominance. Spain had Florida, and at points it had Louisiana as like a goodwill gift from France. Whole mess of stuff. But this discovery and the eventual condensing into it just be, the British fighting the French out in the French and Indian War, where they basically conceded all their territories, and it's just British rule over the American colonies. Fascinating stuff. Dating back to even the original discovery of the Americas. Christopher Columbus gets associated with it. Amerigo Vespucci. There's several other people that have been associated with the discovery of America. Even though it wasn't discovered, it was just European contact. Although there's some evidence of Vikings in the 11 and 1200s making way over to North America. But the European colonization of North America. To me, simply put, America's history is the colonization. Here, my hands are in frame now. The colonization from the 1400s to the 1760s and American Revolution onwards. That's American history to me. Just straight and narrow, and it is fascinating to read about. All right, here we go, my number one. I've talked about my number one favorite historical figure, Napoleon Bonaparte, and I have an obsession with the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. All right. The French Revolution was inspired by the American Revolution, and it was a lot more radical than what the American Revolution experienced. All right. So we got Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette. People hate this family. All right. They absolutely cannot stand them. They get beheaded. It's gruesome. It's graphic. And then comes the Maximilien Robespierre, and I probably pronounce his name wrong, but he comes in to try and stabilize. He's the next person in charge, and the reign of terror begins. And there's beheadings. There's more and more beheadings, and the guillotine is really his popular thing. And then eventually, Robespierre gets a taste of his own medicine, and comes Napoleon Bonaparte, the young general who's been fighting overseas at this time, and he comes in and slowly but surely starts to gain power until eventually he's numero uno. There's no outside influence. It's just Napoleon, and I find it amazing how he seized power, because I think there's lessons to be learned in that. And I find it also just amazing, this empire that he created. All of a sudden, I mean, France has always been a major player on the world stage, but Napoleon really took France to new heights. And it eventually bit him in the ass. You know, his overzealousness, his obsession with, going after Russia, which was his biggest downfall. Because Russia had constantly undermined him in his trade system, which was basically supposed to box Britain out of the rest of European trade. It's I believe he called it the continental system. But just the wars fought. You know, he battled against Prussia and England and a lot of different places. And I read a great book called The Napoleonic Wars. And it was really cool how it described how Napoleon and his presence in early 19th century Europe affected every single country. It was a really fascinating read. But he lost a battle, got exiled, came back for 100 days, lost again at Waterloo, and the rest was history. Napoleon kind of came to an end. He was basically exiled. I think he passed away in 1824, somewhere around that time. So he's in exile for a decent amount of time. But the official end of this time period was November 20th of 1815. And France's borders got reconfigured and whatnot. But there's a lot that goes into it, man. Napoleon is brilliant. Absolutely. You can not agree with him. He can call him evil and whatnot, but brilliance is not a measure of good and evil. He's one of the best military minds of all time. Love him or hate him, but there's a lot there. This has been a very long-winded episode. I love history. I could go on forever, especially if I had my paperwork, or a more detailed listing or some kind of script ready to go. But this is all from the heart, all from top of my mind. Hopefully, I relate it well enough for you. But thank you so much all for watching.